Okay everybody, so we're going to start this video off with Introduction to Skeletal System, Chapter 6, which is on bone tissue. So we've talked about a lot of this stuff in lab already, and some of it you may just already know, but we're going to go through it here. The first part of the skeleton is called the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton is made up of the skull. The skull is made up of bones that enclose the brain, which is called the cranium, and then the 14 bones that make up the face. Then we have the vertebral column, or the backbone. That's made up of 24 vertebrae, and the order of the vertebra is cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. Just remember the analogy of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So there's 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic vertebrae, and 5 lumbar vertebrae. That's important. You should definitely know that there are 7, 12, and 5. And then a lot of times the sacral vertebrae are just called the sacrum, which is fused to the hip bones. And the coccygeal vertebrae are usually just called the coccyx, which is the tailbone. And then the sternum and the rib cage finish off the rest of the axial skeleton. The axial skeleton is all about protecting your most vital organs. So the brain, the spinal cord, the heart, and the lungs are all protected by the axial skeleton. The other part of the skeleton is called the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton is for movement. So it's all the different bones that play a role in our ability to walk and run and sit down and lay down and all that. So the pectoral girdle is made up of the clavicles and the scapula. Clavicles is your collarbones, and the scapula or the scapulae are the shoulder blades. Of course, you have 2 clavicles and 2 scapulae. And then the pelvic girdle is made up of the fused hip bones, which we'll talk about more in Chapter 7. And then, of course, the bones of the arms and the legs are all part of the appendicular skeleton. So this is a really, really great picture in your book on page 175. Now, this picture itself won't be on the test, but it has lots of important information that you need to know. This picture is relating the skeleton to the various different types of cartilages in the body. So if we look here at this skeleton, you'll see that this darker orange color is the axial skeleton. So the skull, the vertebral column, the sternum, and the ribs. And then the lighter tan color is the appendicular skeleton. So the clavicle, the bones of the arm, the bones of the legs. Okay, those are all there in the lighter tan color. But then if we look here, we have a blue color, which is the hyaline cartilage. And you can see that the hyaline cartilage makes up the cartilage of the nose, the costal cartilage, which is the cartilage that's found between the ribs and the sternum, cartilage in the shoulder, in the elbow, the wrist, between the fingers, in the hip joint, there's certainly some in the knee, and then in the ankle and the toes. So anywhere on this skeleton that you see the blue color is made up of hyaline cartilage. Then if you look over here at this picture, which you're going to talk about all of these organs in A&P 2, but if you look here, this is all blue as well. So the cartilage that makes up the thyroid cartilage is what the Adam's apple is, as well as various other types of cartilage that is in the trachea and the respiratory system. Those are all made up of hyaline cartilage. Then if we look at green, which is elastic cartilage, and you should remember from the previous exam that elastic cartilage is found in the ear, which is right there, and the epiglottis, which is right there. So you can see a little bit of green there and a little bit of green there. And then finally in red we have fibrocartilage, which is very, very strong. You have fibrocartilage in the intervertebral discs, which is the cartilage between the vertebrae of the backbone. The pubic symphysis is where the pubic bones of the pelvic girdle unite, and that's made up of fibrocartilage. And you certainly have fibrocartilage in the knee as well. So again, you won't be labeling this picture, but I'll certainly ask you questions about the axial skeleton, the appendicular skeleton, and then hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage, because it's all important in terms of the basic setup of the skeleton. And again, that's page 175. Another good picture is on page 177, and you just need to know these terms for the bones. You're not going to be labeling anything. So the term long bone and irregular bone, flat bone, and short bone. You should know those terms. I probably won't ask all four of them, but you should know things like a long bone is just a bone that's found in the arm or leg, like all of these. And then a flat bone, the sternum is a good example of a flat bone. A vertebra is a good example of an irregular bone because it has an irregular shape. And then the carpals and tarsals are all short bones. So just know some examples of those. It won't be a huge deal on the test. Maybe just a couple questions. And you can always look in your book for more information. So, major functions of the skeleton, first is support and protection. So it helps to, obviously the axial skeleton is going to protect the brain, the spinal cord, the heart and lungs. We already talked about that. So protection is very important. And then just supporting our body, giving our body structure and some degree of strength. And then certainly movement. Our skeleton gives us that ability because the muscles pull on the bones, and when muscles pull on bones in various different directions with various different types of strength, that's going to produce different movements. The skeleton is very important for our calcium reserves as well as our phosphorus reserves. Calcium is an especially important mineral and nutrient that the body needs for various other reasons. The body uses calcium for blood clotting, muscle contraction, nerve impulse. That's important in the reproductive system for women, so very important functions for calcium. And if you're not getting enough calcium in your diet, your body will break down your bone tissue and use that calcium to do other things in your body. So calcium's a very important nutrient. The red bone marrow is inside of the bone cavity, and that's for blood cell production. And then yellow bone marrow is for fat storage. So you can see not only is the skeleton involved with movement and protection, but it has other kind of side functions as well. Alright, so this is just going to be a long list of terms. Just treat these as vocabulary words, make flashcards. The first word is called diaphysis, which is the shaft of a long bone. The epiphysis, which is the ends of the long bone. And the metaphysis is the part that's between the two. And the metaphysis contains the epiphyseal plate. The epiphyseal plate is the growth plate. So that's where the bone is going to actually grow. We're going to spend some time either in this video or the next video talking about the how bones grow. The articular cartilage covers the epiphysis where a connection occurs. We call those connections a joint, and we're going to talk about the joints of the skeleton in Chapter 8. And usually that articular cartilage is going to be made up of hyaline cartilage. The periosteum is the tissue that covers the outer surface of the bone. The medullary cavity is the fancy term for the marrow of the bone. You guys have probably all heard of bone marrow before. And the endosteum is the tissue that lines the internal surface of the inside of the bone. So like I said, just treat these as vocabulary words, make flashcards, and you should hopefully be in good shape for learning these terms. Another really good thing to look at is page 179. Page 179 has a picture of the bone, and it has the epiphysis, the diaphysis. It talks about medullary cavity, periosteum, endosteum. So really, really good picture to look at on page 179 to understand those terms a little bit better. Okay, so the microscopic makeup of the bone tissue. The extracellular matrix is 25% water, 25% collagen, and 50% minerals. And the minerals are things like calcium phosphate, calcium hydroxide, hydroxyapatite, calcium carbonate, and also different types of materials made up of magnesium, fluoride, and potassium. But certainly calcium is the most important. So you can see, that calcium makes up the great majority of half of the bone's extracellular matrix. So half of it is water and collagen. The other half is mostly calcium type compounds. There's 3 major types of bone cells, but we're also going to throw in a 4th one, which is the osteogenic bone cells. Those are the bone stem cells. So a stem cell is a cell that can kind of become any kind of cell that it wants to, or it can become a new kind of cell. So that's just the type of stem cell that gives rise to the different bone cells. It's called an osteogenic cell. But the 3 major types of bone cells are called osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. The osteoblasts build up the bone matrix, or build up the bone tissue, so they create the bone tissue. Osteoblasts will mature into osteocytes, and they maintain the bone structure. So essentially an osteoblast kind of paints themselves into a corner when they create the bone tissue around themselves. So they create bone tissue all around them, and then they kind of become encased in the bone tissue, and that's when they become an osteocyte. They're kind of stuck inside the bone, and they just kind of hang out there and maintain the bone structure. And then the 3rd type is called an osteoclast, which breaks down the bone matrix and essentially recycles the bone. So if the body demands calcium or demands the bone gets broken down for whatever reason, the osteoclasts do that. So the main thing to remember is osteoblast, build up the bone, osteoclasts break down the bone, and osteocytes are just mature bone cells. So make sure you know the different types of bone cells. I'll probably ask osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts on exam 3. So you're going to want to know those types of bone cells. All right. So now we have a lot more terms here. This is on page 180. And I won't ask you all of these on the test, but again, just treat these as vocabulary words. The reason there's pictures here is just to give you actual examples on actual bones. But over here are the words and then the definitions. Okay, so a tuberosity is a large rounded projection. Crest is a narrow ridge of a bone. Trochanter are large, blunt, irregularly shaped processes. And the only trochanters are on the femur. So you can see here is the greater trochanter, and here is the lesser trochanter. So just remember that the trochanters are found on the femur. A line is a narrow ridge of a bone, which is less prominent than a crest. So a crest is a bigger one, and a line is a smaller one. A tubercle is a small rounded projection or process. Epicondyle is a raised area on or above a condyle, which we haven't defined yet. A spine is a sharp, slender, often pointed projection. And a process is any bony prominence. So anything that kind of sticks off the bone, or anything that you kind of look at a bone and you see kind of something sticking off or something kind of hanging out, that's usually going to be called a process. So classic example is the spinous process of a vertebra. And certainly the skull has various different processes, the zygomatic process, the mastoid process, the styloid process. These are all things that you should know on the skull, especially for your midterm practical. Some more terms here. I think we're just about out of time, so this is where we're going to pick up. We're going to pick up with the rest of the picture that's on page 180 in the book. So we're going to go ahead and stop here and pick up from there.